Todd, how you doing?
I'm good, Victor. How are you? You got me?
I got you loud and clear. How you doing today?
I'm doing great, thanks.
Okay. Well, we're ready to go live.
Okay.
I'm thrilled to have you with London and Capital. I've been wanting to do this with you for a long time because you're adding tremendous value to the international community here in Barcelona. And are you ready to do this interview?
I'm looking forward to it. Thanks for having me.
Okay. Actually, why don't we just start off with some softball questions? Can you tell me about yourself, name, background, company, and so forth? For the people who don't know what London Capital is, we're going to take care of that right now.
Absolutely. Todd Cowan. I am originally from Fort Worth, Texas. I grew up in the Midwest in Indianapolis, Indiana, and lived and worked in New York for 14 years before moving to London 5 years ago. I am an executive director and certified financial planner at London and Capital. We are a UK independent registered firm. We've been serving the local market for 35 years. And at that same time, for the past 34, we've been working with individuals with US connections. And for the last 20 years, we've been working with the EU community as well. So EU resident clients.
Okay. And what is the London and Capital's connection to Spain and Barcelona?
That's a great question. So as I mentioned, we've been catering to EU resident clients for almost 20 years. And as recently as the last 6 years, kind of in the wake of Brexit, more specifically since 2020, when there was no financial services agreement within the kind of divorce agreement between the EU and the UK. Businesses with an EU presence were faced with the decision to shutter that business because there was, again, no financial services agreement, or invest in the business. And we were fortunate enough to have our chief investment officer, Pau Moria Giner, who is Catalan, from Barcelona, put his hand up and said, you know what, I'll go back, I'll uproot the family and we'll move back to Barcelona. And we opened up an EU registered office, mainly regulated through the CNMV, which is the Spanish regulator. And because of that regulation, as of last year, we now passport into other parts of Europe as well.
Okay. And is there a focus for your business here?
Yeah, so I have a colleague who actually sits in our Barcelona office who focuses on pretty much all Spanish resident Spanish nationals, as well as international clients, ex-US. And then myself, I am kind of responsible for the geographic expansion within Spain for US connected individuals. So this would be US citizens like you and myself. It could also be green card holders. And then in certain instances, it's that legacy or pesky foreign trust that may have settled somewhere outside the U.S., but then one of the beneficiaries either went to the U.S. for an education or maybe found love, and now that trust has issues as well. So,
okay, and if we can, let's get a little bit more into the markets and the industry, some facts that maybe people don't know much about, interesting factoids. Perhaps let's start off with what are some of the biggest challenges for Americans when they go abroad?
That's a great question. I think understanding how a U.S. citizen or perhaps a legacy green card holder, as I mentioned, has ongoing tax and reporting requirements. Understanding what those are and maintaining those in an appropriate fashion is a big challenge for Americans abroad. I think regardless of whether it's Spain or any other country, identifying suitable investment and wealth management advice, as well as perhaps account structures or underlying investments, can be a challenge. Specifically, advice that can take into consideration multiple jurisdictions. So, you know, as some people listening in will know, Americans, you're American for life unless you take that step to expatriate. Which means that you have ongoing filing requirements, but it also means that you have ongoing potential restrictions when it comes to suitable investments. And with that being the case, finding advisors that understand these nuances of what it's like to be an American can be a challenge. Um, I think certainly that dovetails into kind of navigating the potential toxic investment landscape and what might be suitable for individuals, because there's clearly a lot of great products around the world that are designed and can serve the local resident market quite well, but it may not be beneficial to an American with a U.S. filing requirement. And then again, not an exhaustive list, but one of another challenge is just maintaining custody of U.S. situs assets when an American leaves the U.S. Because over the last 10 years, there have been a number of U.S. financial institutions that have started to exit providing ongoing services for Americans abroad. And just off the top of my head, I know Merrill Lynch, UBS, Fidelity, Wells Fargo, JP Morgan, Chase Bank, TD Ameritrade. These are just some of the names where if they're your current provider and you decide to relocate outside the US and you inform them, or they find out that you're no longer in the US, they're likely to ask you to find another solution. So that's another challenge.
Okay, is there a mistake that many Americans make when they move out to Europe that perhaps you can help them avoid?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, I always say that taking advice is the best medicine. It's almost like, what is it? The prevention versus the cost. And so remediation always costs more money than does taking advice up front. So I think pre-immigration planning can be hugely valuable, and pre-immigration planning in the form of making sure that just your potential arrival goes smoothly. Visas and everything like that are lined up. Are you potentially eligible for some sort of tax favored regime, depending on the country that you might be going to? In the UK, for example, that might be non-dom status. In Spain, it might be the Beckham regime. So are you eligible for this type of favored tax regime? If you're, and not everybody is, it's circumstantial. And therefore, if you're not, it's about making sure you have your affairs in order. And that could be any number of things. That could be potentially rebasing assets. It could be restructuring of assets from accounts that may not be recognized in the country that you're going to go to. So yeah, there's a number of things, but I would really just say have a conversation with a tax or legal professional or a wealth management professional that understands the challenges that an individual with two jurisdictions might face.
Okay, so that's a general comment. Can we get more specific to Spain?
Yeah.
Things that are specific for Spanish residing Americans, expats?
Yeah, I think one of the big ones is the reporting of foreign assets to the Spanish tax authorities. And in this instance, foreign assets would be anything that is not located in Spain. And so if, by chance, a number of people watching this are Americans, that's effectively any U.S. situs asset. That's your IRA, that's your brokerage account, it's potentially your 401k. It could be a number of different assets that you have, and it could be a home that you have outside of Spain. Reporting it in a manner that is consistent with what the Spanish tax regulator is looking for. And it's important to remember that most Americans think in dollar, in Spain thinks in euros. So those assets that you need to report need to be converted and done so from dollar into euro in order to make it digestible for the Spanish tax authorities. And so that's one of the biggest challenges for a Spanish tax resident. I think another one is identifying. I kind of touched on this in the prior, but there's no shortage of great account structures and investment vehicles within Spain. The problem is that they're generally most suitable and best geared towards Spanish nationals, potentially other EU nationals that have settled in Spain, these can be very problematic for Americans, or specifically individuals with U.S. Tax filing obligations. And so making sure that they understand the landscape, or talking with somebody like myself or another or a tax professional that understands that, would be a nice way to alleviate that. I think working, identifying, and I kind of touched on this as well, but identifying professionals, whether it be tax or legal, that understand, I guess, this concept of having two jurisdictions. And the reason this is important is because when it comes to U.S. Spain or Spain and any other country, you're talking about a tax and legal framework that is not harmonized with anywhere else. Ultimately, this is where tax treaties come into play, and they're there to try and minimize double taxation, but they're certainly not there to eradicate it, and completely remove it. So an interesting tidbit, the U.S. Spanish tax treaty was actually revised in 2019. And in that revision, it started to look at pensions. Prior to that, it was kind of wild, wild west, in the sense that a Spanish tax attorney might need to take an opinion on what an IRA was in the US and how that should be treated as it relates to Spanish reporting. So the fact that it's been updated in 2019, we now have a little bit more clarity on that particular topic. But the reason I share that tidbit is because if, as Americans, we think an IRA is pretty much the bread and butter of a retirement asset alongside of a 401k, and it was only in 2019 that the treaty started to weigh in on that, then you can imagine all the other areas in which is not currently covered or talked about. So the reason I mention that is because finding advice, professional advice that understands maybe where the gaps are and where you might need help, as well as what might be covered, is an important consideration, and it could be a challenge if not addressed. And then I think just understanding that due to that lack of harmonization, there are certain account structures and investments that are not recognized in Spain, like a Roth IRA or a 529 college savings plan, or some insurance products would not be recognized in Spain, and therefore could be taxable or not have some of the features that they were purchased for in the US recognized. And then I think the last thing on this front, I think, is just for individuals to understand that trust law is not a recognized concept in Spain. And so for Americans that either have revocable trusts or certain IRAs, Roth IRAs, 529, those fall under trust law in the US. But knowing that revocable trust, that irrevocable trust is not likely to be recognized in Spain, and therefore you need to plan ahead and understand that the Spanish tax authorities will do whatever they can to assign it to the individual. In terms of the assets, that they're going to assign it to the individual that might yield the most tax, to Spain. So,
all right, can you clarify something for me? Because you guys are asset and wealth management, but it's inextricable, it seems, from tax. So, are you guys tax attorneys as well?
No, that's a great question. We actually do not provide we don't provide legal advice, and we don't provide tax advice. As you can imagine, tax is such an important component to an investment management landscape, that we have to have a certain working knowledge of how an investment may be taxed in order to either avoid or advise against it or for it. But we do not provide advice to tax related matters. I'll touch on it maybe as we close out around what we at London & Capital do. But we do provide tax reporting information so clients can take their
okay, that closes the loop.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So then, moving on, can you tell me a little bit more about the landscape for the investment and wealth management advice that you guys give for Americans here in Spain?
Yeah, so I think what might be helpful first is to talk about what my understanding of the investment landscape is prior to London & Capital, and then how we might be just a little bit different. So it's kind of worth mentioning that my passion foray into Spain started around 15, 16 years ago, just on a personal matter, travel, football, food, culture. These are all things that I found incredibly amazing and intriguing. And about 7 years ago, on one of those personal trips, I started asking some questions because I'd been in wealth management for 20 years at the time. And I was just curious about what the provision was of investment and wealth management services. And this picture started to emerge. And it became kind of quite clear to me that there were two pathways for English-speaking individuals as it relates to investment and wealth management in Spain. One was through what's called the IFA, or Independent Financial Advisor channel. These are individuals that are regulated, provide advice, generally suitable to UK, British expats that have relocated to Spain. I've met several of them. They very good people, very good solutions. Unfortunately, a lot of what the offering is not suitable for Americans, whether it be at the account structure level or the underlying. And that really goes back to the idea of kind of toxic investment landscape. And just touching on that real quick, and I'll circle back to the wealth management providers. The idea of a toxic investment is generally around, for Americans, is something called a PFIC. It's taxed very aggressively and then ultimately punitively. And in simplistic terms, a PFIC is generally any investment that is not kind of registered in the U.S. Therefore, we're talking about potentially Spanish registered investments, Ireland registered, Luxembourg registered, and generally anything in a collective. So the easiest and most simplistic way for viewers to think about this is a foreign, as an American, foreign meaning outside the U.S., mutual fund. So anything that was kind of registered outside the U.S., whether it be mutual fund, hedge fund, private equity, things like that, that doesn't have U.S. reporting, it becomes problematic. And again, not to besmirch the very good work that an IFA might do for UK expats, but a number of the investments that they have at their disposal, again, work very well for a British expat in Spain, but it can be deemed to be a PFIC by IRS standards, and therefore it's taxed very heavily right off the bat when it's sold, 37%, highest U.S. marginal tax rate. And then there could be a penalty up into the remainder of any gain that you might have. So, like I said, it's the four-letter word for international, Americans and investing, PFIC. Yeah, PFIC. The other pathway that became obvious to me is there are a handful of local advisors that advise on U.S. connected clients. They might have affiliation with a U.S. RIA, a registered independent advisor. So therefore, they might be able to provide advice on U.S. situs assets. It's been my experience that a number of those advisors might be handcuffed on where that advice can go beyond that U.S. situs asset. They might be restricted to U.S. dollar investment only. And as many people watching this, if they're making that migration to Spain, yes, U.S. legacy assets are important and need to maintain those and manage those. But life may be taking them into a new currency requirement or a new jurisdiction, which they might want to have money invested in euros, sterling, Swiss franc, money closer to their new lives. And so it seems to me that there might be a gap in terms of the holistic wealth management that a local provider might provide. So getting back to the heart of your question, when it comes to London and Capital and the proposition that we've been able to develop, and this kind of dovetails into our broader proposition, we, over the last 34 years, have honed and cultivated the wealth management deliverable for U.S. connected individuals. As the regulatory landscape has changed, as the offering landscape has changed, so we have evolved. Our proposition is focused on planning and structuring at the outset. We are jurisdiction agnostic. We don't care where our client's money is. We don't care what currency it is. We just want to make sure our clients are in the most tax efficient structures they possibly can be in. We want to make sure that the currency that they're invested in meets their requirement for income. We provide them with multi-currency cash flow analysis. After we do that, then we start having a requisite conversation around suitable investment management that takes into consideration multiple tax authorities, the IRS, as well as the Spanish authorities. We can manage against long-term, short-term gains, losses. We can harvest foreign tax credits to offset in a future year. And then after we've kind of had that, then we get into our reporting capabilities, which for us, reporting is twofold. It's the how am I doing reporting against, how are my assets doing? And we can show their accounts in the US, in Luxembourg, wherever they might house them. We can show them in one place and then break them out by account structure. But it's the second component that's really compelling for individuals and viewers of this particular interview. And that is, regardless of where our clients' assets are custodied, we have the ability to provide two tax packs. We provide a tax pack that allows our clients to file in the US, as is their requirement. It'll be in dollar for the calendar year. It'll have FBAR information on it, which is obviously the foreign account reporting requirement. The same account, it doesn't matter whether it's an IRA in the US or a general investment account, or it's in Luxembourg and it's in euros, but that same account will be converted to euros and provided information from a tax perspective that allows them to take it to their Spanish tax attorney or tax advisor and file in a very seamless fashion. And the reason that's a bit compelling from our perspective is we've seen several Spanish tax firms that have had to convert client assets, specifically U.S. assets, into euro denominated so they can appropriately file. And it could start to get quite punchy from a cost perspective. And it's not work that the Spanish tax advisor wants to do, because it's basically administrative in nature. And so they're having to charge on it. The clients don't like it. But what we've done is we've been able to solve for that. So
okay, excellent. Because here at the Metropolitan at the American Society of Barcelona, we've gotten a lot of Americans who have chosen to move to Barcelona. It's very popular, and yet it's been very hard to find registered, properly, prepared advisors to be giving counsel to Americans who have some wealth that they want to preserve, if they have patrimony. And I've heard many things, horror stories, because they're not familiar with some of the sophistication when you're talking about multiple tax regimes. And they give really bad advice. And I've gotten some very adamant people in the past telling me what they're doing. And I'm not an expert, but I just want to hit myself in the head and hit them in the head, because I know that they're on shaky ground. So with London Capital, how do you work here in Barcelona? How can people get to know you?
Well, we have an office in Barcelona. My colleague Diego is on the ground. He's there to meet people any day or night. I'm there once a month, working with Diego on any client-related matters that might be U.S. specific, and we're always happy to take a meeting and talk about what we do. I think one of the things that we've been particularly excited about over the past year, since we got the CNMV regulated business up and running, is that concept that you just popped up, our borderless wealth management capability. And when I think of borderless wealth management, and when London Capital talks about borderless wealth management, it's really built around the fact that we have a unique regulatory approval framework, and then we have a unique custody footprint. So in terms of our regulatory footprint, we are regulated in the US by the SEC. We are regulated in Spain by the CNMV, as I mentioned. And then we are also regulated in the UK and the Channel Islands through the FCA, which is the Financial Conduct Authority. And what that allows us to do is kind of seamlessly advise across these jurisdictions in a regulated fashion. So, we're not sitting there taking a guess on what it is we can and can't do. We actually have the regulatory approval to provide advice across those jurisdictions. When it comes to custody, we have custody arrangement in the U.S., which allows us to, as I mentioned, we can manage IRAs and brokerage accounts and trust accounts in the U.S. We have custody arrangements in the Channel Islands, in Jersey and Guernsey, in the U.K., in Switzerland. And then, but more recently, we've opened up a custody arrangement in Luxembourg, which is kind of a favored jurisdiction for EU resident clients as well as Spanish resident clients. And because of the regulatory approval, as well as the custody footprint, it allows us to kind of tear down the walls that have become increasingly provincial over the last 15 years when it comes to providing advice and executing for wealth management. So when we talk borderless wealth management, we think we've created a pretty unique solution by which takes in consideration a holistic global viewpoint and ability to execute it in the jurisdictions that are important to our clients.
Okay, so I mean, that's a huge differentiator between you and provincial local guys that may not understand this. Not only do you have the I guess the certifications and all those things that make it totally legit in the different jurisdictions which you're advising, but you have a holistic view of how to manage the wealth across different countries and I guess tax reporting requirements.
Yeah, no, it's exactly right. And as I mentioned before, and as you rightly mentioned now, there are tremendous advisors in local markets in the U.S., in Spain, in France, in Germany, Italy, the UK. But all too often, the expertise starts and stops in that jurisdiction, and that's fine. But I think there is an entire niche that has been relatively underserved when it comes to providing advice, again, that is cross-border. And there are some wonderful, wonderful firms that I mentioned at the outset there that are turning their backs, if you will, on Americans because they have gotten out of the cross-border kind of advisory role. So, wonderful brands, but increasingly provincial. And that goes for private banks too. Whether, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, wonderful brands. But if you have, if you have sizable assets and you have money in Paris or in London or New York, you have 3 different advisors. We've created a solution where we're providing a singular global strategy across our clients' entire wealth picture. And then, as you mentioned, we report on it in a consolidated and multi-currency manner. And we're one phone number on to discuss all that, as opposed to having to call New York.
All right. Another question: how can we help you? With London and Capital here in Barcelona or in London.
The way you can help us is just keep talking about me. Just keep talking about Diego Pajaro in Barcelona, London and Capital Europe, and Todd Cowan at London and Capital. We're here to help people. We're here to help make sense of the complexities around cross-border wealth management. We want to simplify it, and so you've been a great partner, and we've known each other obviously several years, and not only as an advocate, but somebody who sings our praises. So, like I said, just keep talking about us because it's working. Our brand is emerging, and I think we're being recognized as a firm that is serious about getting it right.
So. Absolutely, and then you had a big splash when you arrived with your office inauguration. Will you be doing more events here in person?
Yeah, that we actually just had a planning session Tuesday. Well, yeah, actually, within the past 2 business days. I can't remember if it was early this week. It's the long Easter weekend that we just had. It's making things a bit blurry. But we just had a planning session where we talked about events in Barcelona, in Madrid, that are U.S. connected friendly, as well as Latin America and local Spanish, and so yeah, we absolutely will be doing breakfasts and dinners and presentations. So like I said, we want to be a resource for information and a connector of professionals. As I mentioned, 7 years now I've been coming down there and getting to know the landscape. For the past 5 years, I've been working with clients and local professionals across tax, immigration, real estate, in terms of residential real estate, and so the network that we've acquired to be able to help people is ever expanding. So that's one of the benefits of what we've been able to build, is getting people connected to good information.
Fantastic. Is there anything else you want to add, or I just want to make sure that people know how to reach you. If I do a quick plug, it's londonandcapital.com, and with wealth management for individuals and families, institutional asset management, and all kinds of great information. And London and all written out, capital.com. We'll put the information in the text, but I want to make sure you have the last word. If there's anything else you want to say, then it's up to you.
No, thank you. Like I said, I'm grateful to have done this with you, Victor, and really appreciate all your support. And we're just happy to be on your radar and in the ASB and Barcelona Metropolitan community. And if anybody needs anything, please reach out. I think you have my email at todd.cowan, and that's COWAN at londonandcapital.com.
Okay. With nothing else to say, then I'd say thank you, Todd, and I look forward to seeing you here and helping to organize some events for you and preserving the wealth of the American families that are here and growing it as well.
That's exactly right.
All right, brother.
Great.
I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks so much, Victor. Bye.
Certainly.